All right, all right, all right. Welcome back. It's Fit Nation. All right, all right, all right. Welcome back to the Misfit Nation. If you're feeling overwhelmed or floating towards the darkness, do not hesitate to phone a friend. If you're embarrassed that you're having a difficult time, call the Veteran Crisis Hotline at 1-800-273-8255 and press 1. That's 1-800-273-8255 and press 1. Again, as we have told you many times over the past year, do not make a permanent solution to a temporary problem. If you're new to the show, thanks for joining, and be sure to subscribe to our show on your favorite podcast apps. And of course, subscribe to our YouTube channel, _Misfit Nation, so you'll stay up on all our episodes as they're released, while also having the opportunity to get to hear the stories of our amazing guests. Speaking of which, our next guest is an author who hosts the China Unraveled Podcast. On the podcast, he covers what is really happening in China and what it means to the world. He utilizes his background in law and development to help people make sense of what changes in the world mean for their business. So without further ado, let's welcome to the Misfit Nation, Jason Szeftel. How you doing, Jason?
Great. Thanks for having me.
It's awesome, man. Finally get together from across the country and across the world. We can get together now with these little bubbles called Zoom and close in this big marble we live on. What got you interested in China as a whole?
Yeah, my interest goes back a long time. As a kid, I was just always interested in it. I was interested in the art, the culture, the architecture, the history, the look, the language, the whole thing. And then, and I was really into it. So I was reading books that were about China from a young age, and I just went all in early on. And the whole 2000s were big for me. I mean, 9/11, Iraq War, everything was going on, all our Middle Eastern misadventures. I was there, this kid who was obsessed with China. I was just thinking, wow, in the background, we have China growing, modernizing, developing, figuring itself out, overcoming these long-standing challenges with poverty and everything else. And I just wondered, are we about to see another clash, right? Are all these desert skirmishes just, the prelude to a real intercontinental clash of something way bigger and more meaningful, more important? And so that's what I got focused on. So I got a scholarship. I studied in China, lived in China, learned Chinese, and did all that. And a couple of years ago, I decided to put everything together, basically wrote this book, started this podcast when COVID blew up. And now I'm just trying to explain some of what's going on, because a lot of the stuff that's happening in the world is stuff I was picking up on when I was trying to figure out where China was headed. And now everything's just accelerated with COVID. Now we got the breakdown in Europe and soon in Asia. And it's just interesting times, as the Chinese would say.
Very interesting times. As right before COVID blew up on the world, China was in the headlines for their crackdown in Hong Kong and such, and doing what they do to their people in Hong Kong. And all of a sudden the pandemics that happened, and that was all forgotten. That kind of went to the wayside, what they were doing to their own people. And then it wasn't until just recently with the Olympics going to China where people started saying, what about the human rights issues there? But how about the fact that while we, like you mentioned before, were at war for 20 years in the Middle East, China was expanding their empire, so to say, throughout Africa, giving loans to countries that they can't really pay back to build infrastructure, to build their road program right through there. What do you believe about that stuff?
Yeah, most of that's going to be a huge bust for China. It's already actually happened. So when a country can't repay those loans, you're kind of left holding the bag, right? All right, you built them some infrastructure. What if they don't pay you back?
Right.
So China's been forgiving loans. There's been forbearance. There's been all this stuff, but it's learning a really hard lesson that the U.S. learned the last 75 years. Well, if you just start giving development loans to all sorts of countries that aren't developed, you better make sure you chose well, because they can't pay you back and they don't have anything you can take. Like, there's no reason to go build a port there and then just take the port, right? You can do that a couple times. But what are you going to do with a port in Zambia? What are you going to do with the railroad in Zambia? It didn't exist. There wasn't a reason to have it. Now you built it. Now you got it. What are you doing with it? So most of that is a bust. This whole China Belt and Road initiative, this was a lot of things to it, but it was a huge way to keep the engine. One way to think about it is a big way to keep the economic engine in China running, keep it humming, because it's got real problems. And they need to keep everything juiced, really, to keep things moving. So they do the same thing in the real estate sector. They do the same thing with all sorts of industries. And a lot of the industrial development, a lot of the ports, a lot of the factories, a lot of the railroads, a lot of the roads, they'd already done that in China. They already built all that up at a crazy scale. but they couldn't just stop, right? Can't say, all right, the interstate highway system, it's built, we're done. China, it's like, no. We got a lot of people that really need to keep building roads. And so you might as well go do that in Africa and South Asia and everywhere else. But that's all, it's going to be tough. And a lot of these countries are just in trouble. The pandemic's hit a lot of countries outside the US and, third world really, really hard. And they're going to struggle for a long time. So even more of these loans are all going to go bad pretty soon.
Right. And I know China built their first overseas base in Djibouti, basically right next to Camp La Monnaie, the U.S. military base there.
Everyone's got a base in Djibouti.
Got to have Djibouti now. And that was their first overseas base for China, which was ironic. And the fact that they built it basically a stone's throw from the American base was just a point, I guess, poke the bear, I guess, is a way of putting that one. Do you see all these moves by China as a weakness for them?
Yeah, the Djibouti's interesting. I mean, a big reason it's there is because China depends on oil flows, around the Middle East. If you had to put it one place, it's not a bad one. But China's problem is it's far away. There's a lot of countries, blocking it. It's not like the United States where you have big oceans on either side of the country. There's no Japan dangling off your coast. There's no Taiwan. There's no Britain for that matter. There's none of that. And you can just have a massive, expansive, expeditionary military. China doesn't have that. Until 2015, China had a purely defensive military. It had massive ground forces, up to around 2 million people stationed all around the country, and they were meant to defend the territorial integrity of a very large Chinese state. The Chinese state is rarely this large. It's usually much smaller. It's much harder to police, patrol, maintain this massive version of China. We've only had 2 or 3 versions of China that lasted or got this big. And it's a tough thing to keep together. And like we were saying, like building all that infrastructure is even harder because these aren't good places. A lot of like Western China, a lot of Xinjiang, a lot of Tibet. These are not places that have ever seen large amounts of economic development, anything like it. So they've had to brute force a lot of stuff in addition to all the security stuff. And what's happening is that China is really coming to the limits of its military capacity all around the world. Yeah, China would love to have a string of pearls all across the Indian Ocean. It would love to have the entire South China Sea to itself. It would love to have Taiwan to itself. It would love to have, India, kind of subordinate to it. It would love to have no problems in the Himalayas. It just goes on and on, though. It's got, China has basically more border disputes with other nations than any other country, right? It borders more countries than any other country, and half of them claim some of its territory. This is not this isn't Canada and Mexico. All right. That's not your neighborhood out in East Asia. And it's a real difficult thing. And a lot during the 2010s, we were all drinking the Kool-Aid. And I was there so I was primarily in China between 2010 and 2014. And that was when the really triumphalist ascendant rhetoric came into China, right? The financial crisis had hit the United States, felt like the US had just blown up the world economy. There was a big recession in the United States, and China managed to stave off that recession. And it did it in part by kind of kicking the can down the road. So it's coming, but so they're feeling really good about themselves. They're feeling really good. And it infected everything where I was in Beijing and a lot of the conversations. That's what happened. And it spread all around the world. They were doing investments in the United States, and they were buying big, office buildings in New York City, name brand companies, AMC, all this kind of stuff. And then it all started to fade away towards the end of the 2010s. All that started to end. And what we're seeing is a complete change in China, where this whole grand triumphalist take over the world phase is, everybody wants it. Like, they're going to still talk about it. Like, if this manages to happen, they'd feel pretty good. Who doesn't want to be top dog? But trying to make this happen, they don't even see a route to making it happen. What they say is they want to be basically about as powerful as the United States by 2035. And then by 2049, they want to be like the clear number one. But they don't have till 2049. We could definitely talk about why, but we could also see right now in Ukraine, all around the world, history seems to be speeding up. Yes. And that's something that's coming for China in a big way, very imminently. So that's kind of what's really on its mind right now.
And some are saying in the intel world that if in order for Putin to make his move, he's waiting for China to make their move on Taiwan. So that way the American forces are aimed at 2 different places to weaken what they can do in either side, to kind of make it a 2-front war, kind of like World War II. And that's what they believe Putin is waiting for. And I don't know if that's true. And I don't know if China is going to take that major step. Like you said, they're overstretched right now. And I don't know what are your thoughts on them wanting to go to war with us?
Well, they would want to do Taiwan on their own terms and it doesn't have anything to do with Putin, right?
Right.
Like they're not going to coordinate with Putin just so he can have an easier time in Ukraine, right? And the way it is, it's a very Navy first initiative so it's different, right? I don't totally buy a lot of that, but there was definitely a little bit of coordination. Putin did seem to wait until the Olympics were over, like a couple hours. But I think this is more in the West. We're hearing a lot about a Russia-China alliance, and there's no such thing as a Russia-China alliance. This is a brief marriage of convenience. If you look at history, these two countries all the way back have been warring forever, right? You know, people don't realize it, but in the 19th century, imperial Russia, before the communist revolution, they took a huge bite out of China. They took a Texas-sized bite out of China and took it from the Qing dynasty. They took more than anybody. They took more than the British. They took more than anybody. But you don't hear about that because there's some politics going on, but it's not an easy relationship. And the part of the reason you can't really have an alliance is because it's the same reason you can't have NATO help the United States against China. You're on the wrong side of the world. You know what I mean? Like Russia's issues are with Western Europe and Eastern Europe. And then China's issues are in East Asia, and primarily with a lot of littoral nations and a lot of island nations and stuff like that. So it's thousands of miles away. It's a tough one, but we're hearing a lot about this because people are freaked out, don't know what's going on. We don't know why things are happening. And we're trying to recreate like an axis of evil, like we're about to have a World War III thing. That's what I keep getting texts about that kind of thing too, but that's not really what's going on, man. I mean, these are two really struggling states. I'm not going to buy a lot of what the U.S. military is saying on this and a lot of their strategic documents and stuff right now. I mean, these are two extremely vulnerable, troubled states, right? I mean, just to give people context on Russia. Russia is an economy the size of South Korea with a military budget the size of the United Kingdom. It has massive military forces, but it hasn't been able to maintain them for decades. I'm not gonna say, it can punish Ukraine. It can do all sorts of stuff. I'm not trying to say that can't happen. But you got to remember that it's using up to 85% of its military firepower in this one campaign. And it has other problems. It has problems in the Baltics, it has problems with Poland, and it's really running out of juice for the scale of its problems, right? It's got a big military, but the capabilities compared to what it needs, they're just not there. And you look, I mean, there's another thing people might not realize is the Russia has not been able to mass produce any major weapon system in the last 15 years. The industrial capacity of Russia in defense articles has totally disappeared. So China has basically abandoned Russia. It took everything it wanted from China in the defense sector, between basically 90s through like 2015. And now it just makes all of its own stuff. So it doesn't even need Russia anymore. And that's part of the reason there's no real alliance here. China just wants a couple things. It wants Russia to kind of distract the U.S. It wants some energy, wants some natural resources. It wants some basic stuff, but they don't really align in many other ways. And China's really just gotten what it wanted from Russia. And this problem of not being able to really mass produce weapon systems, everything you've heard about hypersonic missiles and all this stuff, a lot of this is repackaged, missiles, the Iskander missiles, kind of what they basically repackaged that to make their new hypersonic nuclear missile. A lot of it's nuclear stuff, which is irrelevant. Like everybody's got nukes. You can't make a new nuke that's going to change that calculus. It's about having new conventional weapons. That's the real hypersonic innovation. And that's where the U.S., even though we're kind of really behind on this thing, kind of dragging the ball and all that, but it is pushing in the right direction. What Russia's doing is a lot of propaganda. It's not going to be able to mass produce its latest fighter jet. It's made 10 of its, Su-57 fighters has been developing for 20 years now. Meanwhile, the United States has over 750 F-35s that have been produced and in the process of being deployed. In the next 5 years, it's going to produce another 750. It's going to double the size of the fleet. It's just a different game. So China's different. I'm talking about Russia here. China can make a lot of stuff. They're building that's a different operation. But on the Russia side of things, I just brought this up for people to realize that there's been a lot of crazy rhetoric about Russia forever. I mean, I think there's something deep here because basically no one's ever really threatened the United States quite like the Soviet Union. So it might have touched us in a really deep way. Like we're just going to forever be weird about Russia. Like It does one thing. It's like, why is there a Russian in Cuba? It's like, I don't know, but it's probably not that big a deal, but we're going to freak out anyway. That's kind of the vibe I get, but it is a real thing. This craze with Russia. And it started really accelerated after Trump's election, where Putin was suddenly a genius and Trump was a tool. And now suddenly Putin's a crazy mad dog fool. And like he's going towards his doom. We've just missed some of the deeper things here. We're personalizing stuff, and we're missing that there's much deeper things going on. So I hope that was a helpful bit of context, because I am so far away from what most people are talking about right now. And I like to just barrel through and try and cut away some of the chaff before we start really getting into it.
Yeah, like you said, a lot of it is propaganda. Russia is like one of the best propaganda machines, and a close second is China. China is a very good propaganda machine with everything they do. China is great. You are horrible. Your country can't help you because we can help you, and that's what they do to themselves and to those around them. And China also borders Russia, so they don't want to fight each other at this point, because that'll be a horrible fight.
Yeah, it'd be a horrible fight. They almost went to war during the Cold War. Was when China was at war with Vietnam, this late 70s through the early 80s. It was a bit of a minor war, in part because the vast majority of the Chinese military was along the Amur River, preparing just in case they got into a tussle with the Soviet Union. So that was the meat of where the military was stationed during that conflict. So it's a real thing. I definitely say that's one thing. I will also say that Russian propaganda has really declined. It's not quite the caliber of the Soviet era. It's really the justifications for this war, the sort of, the bizarre rambling rant of a speech that Putin gave. I think they're really struggling to, what we're really seeing is this is kind of like the death throes of the Russian people in a lot of ways, right? You're having a declining population. Last year, Russia's population declined by 1 million people. Just 1 million
Big number
people.
right there. Yeah.
Big number. Well, let me think about it. Russia's about 150 million people.
Right.
In 15 years, at this rate, you lost 10% of your population. And the people that remain are older. It's a scary thing. And this is kind of happening all around the world. We don't know quite what to do with it. But one thing I will say is that as the Russian propaganda has kind of declined, Chinese stuff's getting crazy too, but they have this digital. They are way more sophisticated in the way they control information. Even if the narratives aren't that great as often, the systematic digital controls and surveillance technologies in China are completely a different level from anything seen in Russia. They can't even make a great firewall in Russia. Basically what China does is just doesn't allow any internet in from the rest of the world. It's just shut off. And Russia tried to do that, but it just couldn't even manage that. So it's a different thing, but they are a bit, peas in a pod in a lot of ways.
And I know you living there for 4 years, from 2010, 5 years to 2014. Every time you walked outside, you've seen the eyes in the sky watching you in China, especially Beijing. I went there in 2009, just after the 2008 Olympics, and they already had closed down the bird cage, and they were changing the cube into, I think it was a shopping center at the time. So you walk around there and you see they called it a 7-star hotel near there. And it was all basically abandoned after they built all that for the Olympics. But as you went further into the country as a tourist, you see what they want you to see. And because they have certain places you have to go as a tourist in order to be able to go there. So we went from Korea to there to see it. And I mean, like you wanted to see the art part of it, and the Great Wall. Everyone wants to see the Great Wall. So we got to see the Great Wall, but then you had to go see the pearl factory. You had to go see the jade factory because that's where the flag was. And you had to go see Tiananmen Square because that's where the flag is, because they want you to be seen on those places. And that way they can use your face. If they ever say, oh, that person was here, you were there as well. Did you ever feel uncomfortable while you were walking around in China or driving around?
Yeah, I just remember one of the first times I popped my head out of the subway in Beijing. It was a really muggy, ugly day, gray day. And I look out, I'm in Tiananmen Square, and I'm looking around, and I just see this giant van. I think I still have this picture I took of it just on my phone. This giant van, like bristling with like cameras and antennas and all this stuff. It was like an ice cream truck for surveillance, right? With little surveillance gizmos all around it. And I thought it looked like it looked fake. You know what I mean? It looked like, those crazy vans you sometimes see like covered in like statements and like all sorts of whatever. It felt like that, but for the government. It was just, I think I laughed actually when I saw it. I was just like, are you serious? This is a real thing. But no, it's crazy. I mean, there's more cameras in China now than there are people in the United States. So it's an intense state. I mean, the reason that the government is doing this is because typically when Chinese states are reaching the end of their life, or again towards the end, what happens is the political center has to start clenching its fist. It tries to control everything it can because it doesn't want the pieces to fling out, like a centrifuge just fling out in all sorts of directions. So what happened in 1911, 1912, when the Qing dynasty, there's supposed to be a revolution called the Xinhai Revolution. Basically, it was a devolution. The state collapsed, the empire collapsed, and every piece of China just became its own little statelet. And it started to war against every other one. And soon the Japanese were in there and it was just chaos all around. That is what the Chinese state worries about, right? This is, they worry about the United States somewhat. They worry about Japan. They really worry about the implosion of China and the resultant chaos, which really could be some of the bloodiest war that anyone's seen in a very, very long time. Like, people don't know this, but before the 20th century, the two bloodiest wars in human history were Chinese civil wars.
Yeah. Because
when it goes
fighting each other,
when they start fighting each other, it's something like it's a real train, just the train derails and you can't put it back on the tracks. And it takes decades. You have to end up with something like the Communist Party, or a new empire that managed to just cut everybody else off at the knees, and then you end up back exactly where you were, right? They're like, oh damn, we're not going to let that happen again. We're not going to open up democracy, open up regional stuff, have sub-federal government types. No. We're going to clench the fist once more. And then it kind of all happens again. You get these cycles over and over again. So people are interested in this stuff. This is what I wrote my book about. So it's called China Unraveled: Order and Chaos in East Asia. And it explains, why do these cycles happen? Why does China, you look at China's history, it looks like, dynasty. Not really. It's really like dynasty, huge chaos, dynasty, chaos, dynasty, chaos. There's way more chaos than there is like ordered, stable states or dynasties. And what I try to do is try to explain why this happens, what we can learn from it, and then why it's happening, what happened to let China modernize, and why it's about to happen again. I mean, there's very few ways out for the Chinese state, for the number of problems that are kind of coming its way right now. And the pandemic's just making it worse. Yes. Nobody planned for that. It was just like, all right. And that's now here on top.
That's now the top of the list for everyone to worry about there. So where can people get your book?
It is still being revised. So it should be out later this year, but now I'm talking about it more because it's in my mind a lot. I'm looking at it every day. So that's
is it getting closer though, or?
Yeah, it is. It's just, I did a couple things. Doing the podcast, doing some other things I've been working on, it kind of pushed it back, but by middle of next month, I'll be doing it every day. So it should be coming out pretty soon.
Awesome. We look forward to that. When it comes out, make sure you shoot us a link. We can put it on our podcast page as well to help you out and get more people to visit it and buy the book and learn more about China from a different perspective than what you see on the media.
Yeah, I'll tell you the big difference between the perspective I'm putting out there and basically what the media is giving you is that one way to think about it is I do it from the ground up and I go geography first, right? So China's had, like I was saying, so many wars. All the different pieces of China have warred, and there are cities in China that have had like 12 different names, right? It's so long that one of the only things that's been constant are the regions, are the land, are the rivers, are the mountains, are the plains, are the valleys. All of this is actually the thing that has endured, and you build it up from there. You can see the patterns that repeat themselves regardless of who's in power, right? And that applies to whether you're looking at Eastern Europe and how it looks like Russia and variations of Germany seem to just do the same rodeo over and over again, time after time. It almost becomes like cliche. It's like, all right, now Russia's going to invade one of its neighbors and they're going to flip out and it's going to be a whole thing. I'm not trying to be flippant about it or minimize it, but there's a real sense in which there are underlying forces that are really embedded in the land itself that push nations and push leaders to do the same sorts of things, even when they look really dumb. It's like, well, Putin, do you really think you could eat, digest, and metabolize a 45 million person nation? Industrial nation, vaguely industrial nation. It's like, seems pretty tough. I mean, the Soviet Union couldn't eat Afghanistan. So you think you can eat Ukraine? Well, it's tough. It's a tough one and I'm just saying it's tough to even explain why someone would do that if we're just talking about like the cost benefit analysis and maybe he wants their natural resources and he's mad about the fall of the Soviet Union. It's like there's deeper stuff going on. So that's what I'm trying to get to.
Yeah. I mean, I think what you hit the nail on the head, that last part right there. He's still mad about the fall of the Soviet Union since he was big in the KGB for his whole life, and then became president and stay president forever. So
what's it been, 22 years, I think? 20.
It's been forever.
It's been forever.
His picture. Everyone knows his picture. I've seen a picture of a dog the other day. They said they don't know if it's going to attack you or invade Ukraine because it looked just like Putin. I said, wow, how'd you get that? It was great.
Yeah, oh, that's funny. I recently, for a while, I knew a guy. He was like really short guy, like 5'4", and he was a short. I think it was Eastern European. I don't think he was actually Russian, but he looked just like Vladimir Putin. And a friend of mine started calling him Little Vlad.
Oh, man.
And it was terrible. So I saw the image, some image associated with one of the invasion, news articles last couple of days, and it just looks so much like this guy. I texted him like, wow, really, really does look like Little Vlad's mad about the fall of the Soviet Union.
And that's what the whole world's doing now. They're making memes or quaking in their boots right now, thinking it's going to happen. So, and it depends on what side of the fence you want to be on this, and what side of the media frenzy you want to listen to.
Yeah. So I'm curious what you think. What do you think the U.S. should do in this situation?
What I think they should do is back up Ukraine as much as possible, but don't rattle the saber into Russia. To show that we're there to support our friends in Ukraine that we've been supporting and trying to push into NATO, and not try to put the sanctions. The sanctions aren't going to do anything to Russia. They never do anything to anyone anyway. If Russia wants to take money, they're going to take money from something, and the sanctions aren't going to do it. Germany cutting off the contract for the pipeline, that's going to hurt them a little bit because that takes off some of the natural gas from the political gas companies there. Other than that, I think what we're doing right now, the saber rattling from 1600, that's not going to really do much because Putin's just laughing at that. But seeing our young men and women get flown over there and our strata fortresses going over there, that'll do more than just the talk in the White House.
Okay. Yeah, I'm always curious what people think. I mean, I think there's such a wide spectrum of opinion. I think people are just so done. It's like what the Afghanistan flailing retreat was that was what, August, right? Yeah. And just only so many 6, 7, 8 months later, there's already new troops somewhere else. I feel like the country is definitely exhausted with that, but you also can't just say peace and just leave the rest of the world to itself, because
right.
You start to see pretty bad things, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, you mentioned Hong Kong, and it's really sad because there's not much anybody can really do about Hong Kong,
right?
And it's basically done. I mean, I have a 3-part series on it. People should check out on the podcast called Battlefield Hong Kong. Talks about how Hong Kong, the Hong Kong we've known, really, it's gone.
It's gone, yeah, and
it's gone.
The pandemic made it smoke and mirrors, so everyone forgot what was happening, and it's gone now. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a terrible thing, and it's a lot. We're gonna, when the rubble, kind of the dust and the smoke from the pandemic is finally cleared, we're gonna look around and we're gonna be like, wow, we are in a completely different world. Yes. Anybody who was hoping for 2019 to just come back and like, oh, we'll be back to normal soon. It's like, no. It's like, no, it's just, it's a crazy thing. I mean, you think about the Spanish flu, that like overlapped with the Bolshevik Revolution, I'm pretty sure, like all that. You're like, all right, let's just go back to 1918. It's like, no,
great.
No, you can't do that.
The advent of chemical warfare. Good.
Yeah, that's a crazy thing.
So everything has a part in history, and we're sitting as live part of it right now to sit back on the sidelines and watch this one now. Well, it'll be curious. I'm curious to see how it unfolds. I'm pretty sure it's going to wind up being just a stalemate, saber rattling for a long time.
Yeah, it's we'll really see, man. I mean, it's tough. Like I was saying, you can't eat that whole country,
right?
And you've already taken little bites of it, over the last 10 years at this point. It doesn't solve any of Russia's problems. That's the real thing here, right? And just like eating Taiwan doesn't solve any of China's problems. It deals with some local politics. It keeps the military busy. It does all sorts of things, but these deeper problems they're still with us, right? And they're not going away. And even if you add, another 10 million or however many million Russians there are, Russian speakers there are in Eastern Ukraine, still losing 1 million a year. The trend isn't good. So I definitely encourage people always focus on that, focus on the deeper things. Because I think you mentioned something important. it is a stalemate. It's not, this isn't like World War, someone was texting me, it's like World War III. It's like World War II, there were a lot of countries with a lot more capacity.
Right.
Germany doesn't have a real military right now. Russia, like I said, has a real military, but an overstretched one, to say the least, when you have like God knows how many thousands of miles of borders. And it's just, it's a different world. It's kind of like we're almost in an exhausted world in a lot of ways. Like we're having these same wars. It seems like the same thing, but we just don't quite have the same gumption or
right
to kind of go through with anything. It's
the will to do. Yeah.
Yeah. The will to do. Huh.
So what's the best way to get for someone to get in contact with you and maybe have you chat with them on their show?
Yeah. You can get me by email, j.sheftel@gmail.com. Find me on Twitter too, Jason Szeftel. You can always, I got a YouTube channel. I do quick live stream, stuff like that. Type in the name, you'll find that too. There's also website, www.jasonsheftel.com. That one, it's cool. It's got articles, stuff like that. I tend to focus on big systems. So I got a focus on, article on like Chinese agriculture, Chinese energy. I got a big article coming out on the Chinese space initiative, right? What's going on? Is there a space race 2.0? Where are things headed? What's the level? What's the playing field? How is the centrality of space and military operations changed? How has it impacted China since the 1990s, since the Gulf War in particular? Where's all that headed? I think it's a very important one. So that's a cool one. And then what other things? Yeah, check out the China Unraveled podcast. Anybody who enjoyed this stuff, I got 11 episodes and the 12th one's coming out. It's cool. I'll tell you guys, for your listeners, it's called Tales of the Communist Empire. It's a big episode, talks about how does communist China actually run? How does it work? What on earth does it mean to have a communist party, to have just one party, to have no elections? How does this thing actually function? I've been asked this question so many times, I decided to just kind of put it together as one thing. So that's the main stuff. I'm also slowly putting together a course. It'll be called Map Your World. It's going to try and explain some of these geographic things I've been talking about, make it very visual, let people see the maps, see the world, and get a sense for what's happening so you can interpret the news, consume the information that's going on, have your own opinions, know enough to be able to adjust your opinions, yes. Do so with grace and, and confidence and humility and all that. And I think it should be really cool. It's another thing people don't want to hear my voice throwing out yet another opinion on this stuff. And I think the goal is always to, not to give the person a fish, but teach them how to fish. Right. So that's what I'm trying to do with that. So people should check it out if they're interested in that. And yeah, with that, there's more than enough ways to find me. If anybody who's interested can head my way.
I have all those links in the show notes. Jason, thanks a lot for taking some of your time to spend it with us here on the Misfit Nation tonight.
Thank you. It was awesome.
You know how we do this. Thanks for taking some of your time to spend with us on Misfit Nation. Be sure to hit that subscribe button and share the link as much as possible. If you want to, please become a supporter to help us carry this thing on. We appreciate you. If you know someone that brings that energy, has a great story, is an up-and-comer in the industry of music, in the arts, have them reach out to us on themisfitnation.com. We will get back to them within one day and get them on here so they can share their story with the world. As always, till next time, be humble, stay hungry, and keep hustling, because we are Misfit Nation.